So my brain was literally being squeezed alive. People have to face their own mortality because my time is limited. What's the worst that can happen? You fail? Okay. You don't have long left to live anyway, so you might as well fail it all. I gave this person a car. They got a full-time job. Now they just bought a house. Honestly, I was just working on the nonprofit that my mom and I built. And just,
So I'll just start by reading the notes that you sent over to me, if that's okay, and that'll kind of give us an overview of your journey thus far, and then we can kind of dive into the granular details. So it says, I'd love to talk about what it was like to go through 2 brain surgeries while still trying to show up for my business, my team, and my purpose. I had my first surgery in 2022, and just as I began to find my footing again, I needed a second one in 2023. It was physically and emotionally draining, but it also cracked me open in ways I didn't expect. I face my own mortality head on every day. My time is limited, and I live with that knowledge daily. That reality shifted everything. I had to make peace with the unknown while continuing to lead, serve, and build. Through it all, I kept growing my consultation business and even launched a non-profit that helps people overcome transportation barriers. I want to talk about the raw parts, how I navigated fear, grief, purpose, and what it means to keep going forward when nothing feels certain. This isn't just a story about recovery, it's about choosing to lead with intention, stepping into your purpose now, not later, and creating impact even when life is falling apart behind the scenes. So, why don't we start with why you had so many brain surgeries?
yeah, so in 2021, 2022, I had been dealing with a lot of back pain first, in all honesty. That's where it started. And I started getting on a wait list. Over here, our neurosurgeons have anywhere from 3 to 6 months of a wait list to be seen. And of course, just dealing with some severe back pain is not an emergency
Right.
at that time. As time went on, I started having to walk with a cane. I was having a lot of these weird neurological symptoms where sometimes like my hands and arms wouldn't listen to me. Like I would be like, why aren't you grabbing this? Like what's wrong with you? And it was actually just 3 days after we closed on our home. I have a picture of us, with our realtor closing on our home, and I have my cane and everything. And then 3 days later, my husband was at work. I'm here alone with my son, who was a preteen at the time. I lost the ability to walk. I could feel my legs, but they weren't listening to what I was saying. They weren't doing the right things. I almost looked like an inebriated person trying to get my footing when I tried to stand. It was insane. So I told my husband, I said, something's really wrong. I was like, I feel it in my bones. I had been feeling really weird all day. I was like, something's off, and now my legs aren't listening. I was like, I don't know how else to put it. And he came home, took me to the hospital, and that was the start of an over 2 week stay. Originally, they thought that it might be meningitis. There was a lot of different, throwing it around.
Yeah.
And after about 5 days in the hospital is whenever they figured out that I have masses within my spinal cord. So it's not in the spine itself, because if it was in the spine, then it would be operable. But
Right.
these are actually within the cord, so they can't touch it. There's a lot of risk there, of course, when you go into a bundle of nerves. And basically what was happening as far as not being able to walk and some of my other things, not only were those masses putting pressure onto my spinal cord, but they were also preventing the flow of my cerebral fluid from my head. So my brain was literally being squeezed alive.
Oh, wow.
And the crazy thing is, my head hurt, but in comparison to my other symptoms, it's not something that I was avidly talking to them about. I was telling them my head hurt, but I was like, I'm like, I guess I have a pretty high pain tolerance because they're like, it doesn't hurt really bad. I'm like, I don't know. It's like a 3 or a 4. Like it's a pain, but yeah, I'm not dying,
Yeah.
right? And they're like, I was like, wait, I'm not dying, right? But it was that was the beginning. They had to put a VP shunt in my head. That was my first surgery
Right.
during that 2 week hospital stay. So I have a machine that's right here, and there's a little catheter that goes around behind my ear, and actually, you can see
Oh.
it right there.
So what does
And
that do?
it drains the extra fluid from my brain into my stomach.
Okay.
Because a lot of people don't know that the fluid actually it's like it goes up and down your spinal cord through your brain and then back down, and it just cycles and
Okay.
creates. And mine can go up but it can't go down because of
Ah,
the
okay.
masses. Yeah, so and then I came home, had to learn how to walk again, and that was interesting. Stairs are still tricky, by the way.
Wow.
Like walking wasn't the hardest part of that. It was the things that you don't think about in walking. So like navigating stairs and or like sidestepping.
Hmm.
Somebody's like walking past you and you're like, leg, I need you to like go this way. And then a year later, they were looking at my scans because I still have to get scans every couple of months. A year later, I had to go back and get another surgery called a Chiari decompression surgery. And that is where they go in to the back and they take off a part of the back of your skull. And then they take off your very first vertebrae, your C1, basically to enable room. It's creating space where those masses are for my brain to be there. That was so August 2022 is my first one, and then December 2023 was my second surgery. So we just got a little over a year out from having surgeries. And I'll admit, coming up on late last year, I was like, no problems. I need Christmas. Because especially going from like COVID, 2020, 2021 was weird, Christmas,
Yeah.
trying to do things, and then surgeries. So up to 2024, I hadn't even been able to go and spend time with my family for the holidays or anything like that.
So
That's why I had the surgeries.
what do we know what the cause is, or is it just random?
So it really is a bit of which came first, the chicken or the egg.
Hmm.
Because there are some cases where there's an extra production of fluid that can cause these masses to form within the spinal cord. And then that causes like the issues, of course, with the backup and the fluid. Then there are some cases where it's not the masses first. It's, oh, well, or the overproduction first. It is the masses first. So they
Right.
don't know what came first because prior to that, of course, I had no inclination, even though the neurosurgeon says that these were probably developing for at the very least a couple of years prior to my diagnosis, because the one in my neck spans the entirety of my neck. And the one at my thoracic spine, which is about your mid back, spans about four-ish vertebrae. It goes like kind of into the fifth.
Okay. So in your notes, you said that while going through all of this stuff, you still had to maintain like your home life and your career. So you were still working,
Yeah.
is that right?
Yeah, so my first surgery, I was in the hospital for 2 weeks. I went back to work because the majority of my work is done remotely,
Hmm.
outside of like visiting clients and such. So it was very easy for me to tell everyone I can't come and see you, but I mean, I had to go back to work about 3 weeks after getting back from the hospital. So while navigating like relearning how to walk and all the things, I also returned back to work. That was I'm crazy. I'm a little crazy. Everyone thinks I am whenever I say this, but that's also whenever my mother and I were like, we're starting a nonprofit.
So
So,
let's talk about. It says so. Obviously, it was physically and emotionally draining, but it cracked you
yeah.
open in ways you didn't expect. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. I think and there's so many layers to that. I feel like Shrek. It's like an onion. Because I think that whenever people have to face their own mortality, because my time is limited. They've been very open with me. I told the doctor, I said, I appreciate direct. I was like, don't skip around. And he said, well, he was like, I'll be honest, like, we're just surprised that you are not already paralyzed. We don't know how you are not paralyzed. So, that being said, we cannot, there's no guarantees here. We're doing what we can, but at the end of the day, we cannot fix the problem. So, we're just kind of ballparking and taking things as they come.
Yeah.
So he said that, he would be very surprised if, within the next 10 years I didn't go completely paralyzed. And that would be because of where everything is placed, I would actually lose the ability with my arms and stuff first, my legs. So it would be that and my chest. So I'd have to, be on a machine and all of that is like testing, right? I mean, all of
Yeah.
that is like, whoa. I mean, I had to take this time to process through everything while also handling life. And, I'm a mom and I'm a wife and a worker. And I'm also I'm also a huge person, a component, a supporter for in the community. Meaning, I do a lot of volunteer work and I have a lot of like support out there. So I had to navigate all of that, and I mean that's something that there's not a lot of advice out there for.
Cool.
You know, I mean, you can read books on facing your own death and on all the things surrounding medical issues and chronic illnesses, but each individual also has a very different journey. And yeah, there's no plan for this. There's no guidelines. And so figuring all that out really, I mean, it's tested me mentally and emotionally. It's pushed me to a point where I had to tell myself, you either figure it out or what. Because there's no don't, there's no you you have to keep going. You can't just give up.
Yeah.
I mean, and I had to ask myself, like, what would giving up even look like? Because there were days, and there still are. I mean, admittedly, I've had new nerve pain and stuff going on with my shoulder, and my right arm. Just in the past week, I've been learning. I'm right-handed. I have been learning to use my left hand. So
Oh, okay.
I've converted my mouse over and stuff because I know that that's coming. And I think that that side's going to be first. But it's those things. And I asked myself, what does it look like to give up? And I was like, well, I was like, I guess I don't really know what that looks like because even if I just lay in my bed all day, I'm not actually going to die right away. I'm just going to be, for lack of a better term, that's whenever I would become a burden to the family. I'm not a burden now. And dealing with my condition, even, once paralysis hits, once those things happen, I wouldn't be a burden that, taking care of your family doesn't make you, or it doesn't, if you have to be taken care of by your family, it doesn't make you a burden. If I give up, that would be because what are they going to do? It's up to me to get in the right mindset and get in that right mentality to push forward. And then I had to start asking myself, like, well, what would make me feel better about this situation? And see, I'm a planner. I really am. Whenever I was emailing, I said I rarely miss a meeting because I live by my schedule. It is my calendar is probably one of my favorite tools, and it's so simplistic. But I was like, I need to know that things are going to be okay when I'm not okay, and but that it grew action within me. It grew this want to go ahead and do the things that I've always been scared to do. When I say I don't live in fear, that doesn't mean I'm going to go skydiving. I still have a fear of skydiving. That's not going to happen before I pass away. But I also always ask myself whenever I'm not doing something or I'm putting something off, I'm like, why? What are you afraid of? What's the worst that can happen? You fail? Okay. You don't have long left to live anyway, so you might as well fail it all. It's either going to be great or a lesson learned that maybe you can pass on to somebody else before that time comes. And those are the ways that like it just I was already a positive person, but it kind of feels like this entire experience has like broken me down to my core and then rebuilt me as not just a positive person, but a strong person that is just ready for life because there's not a lot of time left for me to live it.
Right. I totally understand that. So I'm currently on this kind of journey, right, of self-discovery, and that's hence the podcast. And this kicked off this time last year, and over that
Yeah.
time, there's obviously been a massive change in the way that I perceive things and the way I see things and the way that I handle life. And now I'm similar, so I just chase the things that used to be scary or that maybe put me off,
Yes.
constantly push myself out of my comfort zone. And as part of that, a kind of side effect that I wasn't expecting was that I noticed everyday people that I pass on the street that I can tell aren't in that same space. And I noticed that a lot of
Yes.
people are just kind of floating through life, not really doing anything, not really trying anything, not pushing themselves to do anything. And I noticed that I was that way for 36 years, 35 years. And it's I don't know what the word is. It's kind of off-putting that so many people live that way,
Yeah.
but I feel like you have to encounter something really hard to get that wake-up call. And the mortality thing, especially the mortality thing, has always fascinated me. So those people who, for example, get terminal cancer and they're told they have X amount of months or years or whatever it is to live, has always fascinated me because I think, what kind of journey must that be? You know you're going to die.
Yeah.
Like everyone knows they're going to die, but it could be at
Yeah.
70 or 80. It could be tomorrow. It's kind of you
Yeah.
can't really face your mortality that way. But when you're told you have 6 months, what
Mm-hmm.
do you do with that time? And it must completely change the way you think about absolutely everything. And there was this girl
Yeah.
I worked with like 10 years ago who was given like that diagnosis of terminal cancer, and then through the chemo and all the radiotherapy and stuff, she was healed, and she came back to work, and I didn't really notice much of a change in her, and that confused me because I thought you must have faced your mortality, you must have thought it's nearly over, and then you were given this golden ticket, and what now? Like, how do you feel now? How do you think now? I can't even, I can't put my head around it. So
Yeah.
is there anything? Obviously, you said you're still scared of skydiving, which is understandable. But is there anything that you used to shy away from that now you push yourself to do those things?
I mean, in all honesty, very much doing things like this throughout my life. I mean, if you know me personally, like if you're in my circle, it's I'm a very open book, and I've always been a people person, but especially speaking, I don't know, I've just never had my voice out there.
Mhm.
I've never had my story out there, and I always wanted to, but I held myself back. I've always had these like great things, and I've done these like little trainings. Like I'm in this professional women's networking group, and that they really enjoy whenever I'm speaking and talking about stuff, and they're like, man, like you should do more of this, because my journey didn't just start at brain surgery.
Yeah.
It was even growing up. There was my mom was a teen mom and a single mom for a while, and it was, there's a lot of adversity there, and I have like all of these thoughts, and I did all of this work whenever I became an adult because I said I want my life to be different. right? And but what I didn't do is I was doing these little things to like put more positivity. I always say I want before I die, I just hope that I put more positivity into the world than negativity. And so I was doing all these little things, but I was always behind the scenes.
Hmm.
Like here in South Carolina, sometimes people would get surprised at like the people that I know and some of the events that I've gone to, things like that. They're like, well, I didn't see you. It's not like on social media or, those type of things. And I'm like, yeah, that's okay. Like I was just doing this to have fun. I don't do it for attention. And not that I'm doing any of this for attention now, but I just, my goal this year, I made a vision board. Actually, I see it behind me. That's what reminded me. I made a vision board at the beginning of the year with this group, and I realized that one of the biggest things that I wanted was just to be seen and heard because that has always been my fear. And I think a lot of people, particularly here and within our generation, we were in the generation of kids should be seen and not heard. And I think that that type of trauma and everything that comes along with it is a part of why I was the way that I was, And now I'm like, no, and I push myself every day with my confidence, whether it's something public like this or even like in person or even talking on the phone with somebody. If there's something that I want to say, of course, in kindness, if there's something I want to put out there, then I just put it out there. It's no longer, even with my business, it's no longer like, yeah, why don't you reach out? We can see if I can help with that. It's give me a call. I can help you with that, and we'll get you taken care of.
Hmm.
There's just a confidence that I don't know. Some days I feel like I'm faking it till I make it. I don't know. Some days I'm like, maybe the confidence isn't real, but we're gonna put it on. But that's what I wanted, like personally for me. Then again, the nonprofit that I made with my mom, my first surgery, whenever I was still in the hospital. Whenever I told them that we were going to be opening a nonprofit, and they were like, "Man, you must be on some good drugs." And I was like, "I am." I was like, "I am. These are fantastic, but that's not the point."
Yeah.
I was like, "We're gonna open a nonprofit, and like this is my idea." And I looked at my mom, and I was like, "You have to help me like form this and this that and the other." And like, my brain has always been very operational, but even making moves like that has been like I just don't let anxiety or fear hold me back. And even personally with my plans with my family, pushing forward and even having certain conversations with people or putting certain plans into place. Like I have everything. I've actually since I was like 18 or 19, I've always had like a will together because someone told me like I was meeting with a manager or something like that. And I remember this lady, she was elderly, and she was like, if you don't have a will, you're stupid. And I was 18, so I was like, you know what? That sounds like an adult thing to do. Maybe
Yeah.
I should do that. So even doing things like that though, and like updating the will and lining up my family for success, like, in my passing or whenever I'm down, like there's just such an anxiety. There's just sometimes, I don't know if the word is like taboo around certain conversations and all these things. And I was like, fuck it. We're having these conversations. We're doing these things. They're not necessarily negative. They're things that have to happen. They're conversations I want to have, and it's stuff maybe even that I want to learn and just do and experience. I'm not a person like if I had $1 million dropped on me today that would go out and buy like a Tesla, I would be like, hey, so we're traveling. I love experiences. And so as a person who has always loved experience, I want to experience life. I don't want to survive. I want to thrive.
Yeah. Exactly. I agree with the generational aspect. So I
Yeah.
I haven't told Well, no, I've told one person about this podcast, and he watches it and he enjoys it. He's the only person in my
Yeah.
life that I can have these kind of conversations with, and I've kind of tried with other people in my friendship group or in my family, but our generation are very well. It's as you say that we were told, or there was a kind of implicit seen but not heard, and
Yeah.
there's this kind of lack of imagination or drive to do anything outside the norm. So I have a very typical career, and as do all my friends. And
Yeah.
we have known people to try and divert from that path and do something different. I've got an old
Mhm.
school friend who wanted to be an actor and a comedian, and he's trying to follow that path. I've got another friend who wanted to be like a rock star, and he's stuck on that path. And the way my people in my circle talk about them is kind of putting them down, as if like, oh, why are they doing that? That's not going to work. They should get a real job and just do that stuff. And people in my family are the same.
Yes.
And that's the reason. I mean, I was the same, to be perfectly honest. I've always been a very,
Yeah.
very by the book. I've never believed
Hmm.
in anything outside of the kind of the well trodden path until I had
Hmm.
this past year that was like life changing. And it's
Yeah.
then that I started listening to those motivational and inspirational videos, and I was like, yeah, so it's those inspirational videos always say pretty similar things of like anyone can do anything, and you hear that and you go, yeah, yeah, okay, yeah, that's easy for you to say, yeah, okay, sure. But it's when you go through it and then you kind of reach your lowest ebb, and you look at your life and think, this isn't where I want it to be, and then you hear them and you think,
Hmm.
yeah, literally anyone can do anything. What's stopping me from doing absolutely anything? If I commit,
Yeah.
I said this on a recent episode, we all get the same 24 hours, and 8 hours should be spent sleeping. 8 hours, unfortunately, must be spent working. We've all got 8 hours spare. And most people spend that watching Netflix, unfortunately. And I decided I'm going to spend those 8 hours working on my passion. And then I did, and that's what this is. And now I realized the other day when someone asked me, oh, it was Black Mirror. The new Black Mirror came out on Netflix. And they said, have you watched it? And I was like, no. And they're like, oh, what are you watching then? And I was like, I haven't watched anything for months. I haven't watched anything. I haven't played video games for months.
Yeah.
All of my spare time is now
Oh
is
my
now
gosh.
focusing on my passion. But I feel like you these kind of talks only resonate with people in a similar mindset. People who have gone through
Hmm.
hard times, and and I don't know. There's something about it. Unless you've been
Hmm.
through those, you just kind of dismiss it, don't you? Or maybe
Yeah.
that's just our generation. I don't know.
Well, I mean, and I think you're right. I like what you were talking about, especially like career wise and the things that we do in life. There's definitely in our generation that it's not just kids are meant to be seen and not heard, but then you get a little bit older and everything that you're doing that might be outside of a regular path or an understood path is again like for attention
Yeah,
or or you just want to be different, even with my business that I made, I held myself back for a really long time because it's out of the norm. And it is like, as far as like people having their own businesses, starting businesses, our generation was the generation of MLMs. And so I think that there was almost this like stigma or judgment. Even if you were starting your own company, you weren't like signing up, for something. There was, I don't know, there was just this thing in this generation. I can't put my tongue to the word right now, but with how they perceive people and starting their businesses. And I just remember, whenever I started, so I actually started like 8 years ago, doing my thing. And I just called it like a side gig, honestly,
yeah,
until about really the past like year or so, because I was like, I was like, this is pretty big. This is not a side, like I am legit. What was it? I think my son used he's 16, so it was bussin' or something, whatever the slang that he was using at that point in time. And I was like, that's good, right? And he's like, yes. I'm like, cool. I'm like, that's awesome. That's awesome. But I think that I'm very much with you. And there's not a lot of people I have a small circle, very, very small circle. There's not a lot of people in my personal life. I do things like sharing these adventures that I'm on now. And that's not based out of fear, though. I realize that, and if they're listening to this, this is a you problem. I realize that I don't have time for that. I really don't have time for the negativity. I don't have time for judgment. I am always a person, like, I don't see competition. I see there's a seat at the table for everyone in every capacity. And so I've always been a person, even before all of this, that I believed in building other people up and celebrating successes. And I really hated to see those people that, would get jealous of others for no flipping reason. We're all here. We're all just trying. Why do you have to knock someone down just to build yourself up? That is so, I can't. And so, yeah, I think after my brain surgeries, it was, I don't know, there's, I guess, a boundary, if you want to call it that, that was drawn around it. It
Yeah.
was like, I'm doing what I'm doing. If you're not building me up, like, or not really if you're not building me up, but if you are tearing me down, if you're jealous, if you're dealing with your negative emotions, that is a you problem. I mean, I'm here if you want to talk about it. But at the end of the day, that's a you problem. You need to work through it, and you need to work through your insecurities, because I would support you on your journey. So why wouldn't you support me?
So one of the things that you always hear or at least I always hear in these motivational videos, is obviously they're from very successful people, and they all say the same
Yeah.
thing in terms of their friendship group, is that they had to reach a point in their life. In fact, Eric Ruth, who was my first guest on, said the same thing. He reached a point where he realized the people in his life were holding him back or dragging him down, and he had to sever those ties.
Yes.
And this is something that I've heard for years, but it's also something that I always shied away from, because I don't want to sever those ties. but like, so I was wondering recently how to go about that, and
Yeah.
I suppose there's no hard and fast rules. So I had another guest on called Sebastian, who is like a 22-year-old stocks and shares guru, very wealthy, very successful. And I asked him this question about how to do you still have friends? So that age, they're typically, Twitch streamers or something. Like, do you have any friends that just play video games all day, or did you sever those ties? And he said, no, I've got some people in my life who are super successful and super driven, and I surround myself with those people. But I still have friends who, play video games and don't really do anything with their lives, and I like hanging out with those as well. So I've been toying with this idea of how do you sever those ties? And I heard someone else say that you stop reaching out to them and see what happens. And if they reach out to you, then okay, they're a friend. If it just dies, then, well, just leave it then. They're probably not best people for you. But
Maybe. Yeah.
yeah, it's a really tricky thing. The whole dragging people down thing. I've heard people theorize about what it is, and the main theory is that they're kind of portraying their fears
Yeah.
onto you. It's like you're rushing off and succeeding, and I wish I had the courage to do that, so I'm going to try and drag you down to make myself feel better. I don't know. It might sound a bit pretentious to think that, but I'm like you. I've always been the person to kind of push those people. Those friends
Yeah.
that I mentioned earlier who try to do things outside the norm, I always encourage them. And yeah, there's another anecdote from Alex Hormozy, who's an entrepreneur I've seen on podcasts, and he had an interesting story where, so his first business was some sort of gym or series of gyms, and when he first started, he was homeless because he decided he had to stop what he was doing for work and just focus all his time and money and energy into his gym, which resulted in him having to sleep in his gym. And when he got his first few clients and members, they would come in and see his like sleeping bag in the corner and be like, "Oh, we see what's going on here," and they would support him and be like, "We really encourage you, and we're gonna join your gym and be members, and we want to see you strive." Until the point where he had multiple gyms and was raking in loads of money, and he would show up in his Mercedes or whatever, and then their attitude just changed, and they were, I don't know, the way they were talking to him like he was some big CEO and he's too good for them, and he was like, "What are you? I'm doing what you wanted me to do. You were pushing me to do it. Now I'm here. You're trying to tear me down."
Yes. Well, and I think I don't like to say, so I was having a conversation with somebody the other day, and they said something about outgrowing someone that they knew. They're like, I don't want to use that word because it's not like I'm above them.
Yeah,
And I was like, you're right. I said, I like to use spaces. We're all in our own different spaces. And I mean, it doesn't matter if it's a homeless person or a CEO of a, Fortune 500. Either way, one is not above the other. We're all human, but we're just in different spaces of our life. And I think that the way I approach these things, and I don't, I've never had to do it before now, so I don't know how, like, pre brain surgery Kayla would have done it. She probably would have shied away a little bit, but and taken the avoidance route. But I know now I tend to have open and honest conversations with these people. I mean, I think it depends on the person, really. It depends on them, it depends on the situation, but most of the people within my life right now, because I am in such a different space, you know, I I feel like there's been a conversation of, I feel like our spaces have changed. I feel
yeah,
like, you know, this isn't the capacity that we're in anymore together. That doesn't mean that I have any ill intent. That doesn't mean you can't reach out and, I don't know, once every 6 months have coffee or something. Like, but at the end of the day, we all grow, we all change, we all learn. Well, most of us do, as we should. And I think that there needs to be like a respect of that as well. To say, hey, we're not the same people that we were maybe like 5 years ago whenever we met. We no longer, especially in a professional sense. I've been running into this professionally where I have just, because I've changed spaces, because I am more out there and not holding myself back, and I'm going and I'm getting it and I'm getting it done. I've grown, and I've even had people reach out to me to say, like, I feel like, you and I, like, you have outgrown me or something. I feel like you just like took off. And I'm like, no. I was like, our dynamics just changed because we're growing as people and we're on different journeys in life. For me, I feel like in most instances, it doesn't mean that I necessarily need to cut somebody off unless they are really actually being toxic. Like those friends, the guy that you were just talking about. If they're sitting there talking behind my back, that what for me what that would look like is a conversation of, hey, what did I do something to make you feel this way, to make you feel that I'm hoity-toity, or however you want to put it? Is that just how you feel? Is this an insecurity on your side? But that's also part of what I was saying earlier, how I have uncomfortable conversations now. I don't hold that back, and it's not to call people out as much as it is to, well, I guess it is. Like it's I want people, if they have the capacity, if they are in that space to accept feedback and gain understanding, then it's an honor to be that person that helped them to get there.
yeah,
Now, I've had some of these conversations that have ended up in them being pissed off at me. And then, but then I have had other conversations where the person says, okay, like, let me process. I'm like, oh, look at you using skills. But then they do come back and say, hey, I guess I needed to hear that. Like, I needed that check because realistically, if I get to where you're at, I wouldn't want to be treated that way either. And that right there, I'm like, boom, difference made. I'm good. Check me out.
I just I kind of keep things separate, or at least at the moment. So I kind of did a tester recently. It wasn't even on purpose. I was at a friend's housewarming with some friends, and I'd had a few drinks, and my kind of this new version of myself that just replays all of the motivational quotes in his head to get through the day came out. And so my friends were talking about, Gen Z, how they've got like Gen Z apprentices at their workplace, and they have been so sheltered that at the slightest little difficulty or hardship at work, they just kind of crumble. And I was listening to it, and I thought of something that kind of resonates with that, and I decided to say it. And I said, "Hard times create strong men," which is a book that I read last year, and it's a philosophy that I really, really stand behind. And a friend of mine turned around. So I said, "Hard times create strong men," and they were like, "What?" And I said, "It's a quote. Do you know who said that?" And a friend turned around and said, "Joe Rogan." And I said, it wasn't Joe Rogan." And he said, "Yeah, it was. It was Joe Rogan. You're an incel." And I was just like, "Okay, I've put
Ooh.
myself out there. I've tested the waters. I got shot down immediately. Now I know. I'm just not going to talk about this stuff anymore." So now I've kind of separated this version of myself
Yeah.
to that kind of group. That was definitely an
Have you had
interesting.
anyone that kind of like come back?
How do you mean?
Like anyone that has like shown like that personal growth and then later on like kind of maybe reached out or something? I had someone do that like she reached out and she was just like, I mean, this had been like a year or so
Yeah,
before, and we had not spoken. And she said, "I just wanted to let you know that I see the moves you're making. I see what you're doing. I see what we've gone through, and I'm really proud of you." And I was like, somebody's been on a self journey. Have you ever experienced that?
yeah. This weekend just gone. Actually, it was really encouraging. So I've got this one friend who has the similar thought process as me. We have the same ideology and stuff. And we went out for drinks, and he's the only person that I've told about this podcast, and he watches it and he's really behind it. And he was it's really interesting. So he was always a person who encouraged me. So when we met like 10 years ago, we were both working in a really dead end job in like a warehouse. Because at that point in my life, I had no drive at all. I just wanted to make enough money to pay my bills, and that was it. And I was just going to get to the end of life. And he was the one who encouraged me to try harder, and that's how I got into like a more professional career. And then like this time last year was at my lowest ebb, and he was the kind of person that I really leaned on. And then yeah, this weekend just gone, we went out for drinks, and he actually reached out to me and said, "I wanted to talk to you because I see the things you're doing. You're waking up at 5 every morning. You're hitting the gym every day. You get 10,000 steps every day, 3 liters of water every day, cold showers, just this endless list of stuff that I do. And the podcast as well. I commit like a third of my time to my passion, and he can see that I'm like vastly different to who I was a year ago or even 10 years ago." And it inspired him, and he said, "I like how do I do that? I've tried getting up at 5, but the temptation to roll over and snooze the alarm is just too tempting. So how do you do it?" And I was like touched that someone had noticed and acknowledged it, and then actually reached out to me for that encouragement. But it was really difficult to actually tell him what to do or how to do it. I just had to kind of regurgitate all the things that I've heard from other podcasts and books that I've read and that I commit to memory. And I was like, this is what worked for me. I hope it works for you. I mean, to be fair, that was at the weekend. So it's been like best part of a week. And he has been getting up at 5 every day since then. So that's a start. That's
Yeah.
promising.
Yeah, I mean, and it's funny that you say that because I told this person, I was like, my advice to her was to start off with a couple of things. Put more positivity into your life. Listen to the motivational speakers, even if they seem cheesy
Yeah.
sometimes, because it is. Listen to the motivational speakers, because you internalize that, right? You
Yeah.
start to internalize it, and it's almost like affirmations because you're hearing it and you're hearing those things over and over again. I was like, but honestly, I said, my biggest advice is to know that you're the only one that can take action for you.
Hmm.
And you have to ask yourself, what are you waiting on? You're the only thing. We are our own worst enemies. Just like I don't know about you, but most of the people I know, we're also our own worst critics. And I told her, I was like, when I started really asking myself that question, that's really whenever like my entire mindset started shifting over. And I equated it. We had this great conversation where I told her, I was like, it reminds me of whenever I first moved out of my parents' house and like I was living by myself. And even though they had told me for the probably the entirety of my life what to do, like, that I was going to be on my own one day and I had to learn these skills and I had to do this and do that. It wasn't until I got out by myself when it really hit me. If I don't take out the trash, nobody's going to do it. If I don't sweep this up, there's literally no one there to pick up after me. There's no one there to hold me accountable. It is up to me to do that. It's the same concept, except, with my profession, with my life, with, health and everything is pretty much the same thing that I've internalized with it is nobody else is going to do it. Yes, I have a support system. I have a wonderful support system. But at the end of the day, I mean, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink, right?
Yeah. That's yeah. I only started getting better when I started doing it for myself. I
Yeah.
had I had a good support system when I was at my lowest ebb, of like half a dozen friends and family, and I found what I was doing was just kind of bitching to them all the time. I was severely depressed, as I say, and I was just texting them like all day, just complaining about how I was feeling and how much I hated life, and then they would reply and do their best to kind of talk me out of it. And it's actually after, I don't know, a couple of months of doing that they stopped replying, and I would just send them this kind of trauma dump, and they would stop replying, and then
Yeah.
I realized they're gone. I've pushed them away. I'm gonna have to do this on
Yeah.
my own. And I feel like going back to the whole holding people back thing, or at least not encouraging people. I feel like until you go through that, until you experience that, until you go through some life changing hardship, you're not going to have that same mindset. And I think that's
Yeah.
why we kind of we go down the hard trodden path, the well trodden path, and we do what society has always done because that's what we expect we should do. And most people typically go to college and they get a job and then get married and they get a mortgage. But who's to say that's the right way? And I'm not saying like don't go to
Yeah.
college, don't get a relationship, don't get a house. But I mean, I haven't done some of those things, and I don't know who's to say that the thing that everyone else does is necessarily the thing that's going to lead to happiness. You know?
Yeah. I mean, it's all our journey and like our own individual journeys. And look, I have no shame in my past. And I did like none of that. I mean, I bought a house but a couple years ago, but yeah, I was divorced. Like I married super young,
Hmm.
in my early 20s. Big mistake. Great guy, just, we were young and dumb. And again, I mean, it's not off the table. I put this out there and sometimes this makes people uncomfortable, so forewarning, but I was also a teen mom. Like I had my son at 18, just 2 weeks after my 18th birthday actually. And then I got married. I tried to do the thing that didn't work. So then I'm a single mom for a little while. And honestly, whenever I met my husband now, because we have been together for 10 years, 11. Oh my gosh, 11 years. But when I met my husband now, it's so funny because one of the conversations that I had with him was, you know, I said, I don't even know if I'm going to be interested in marriage again. I was like, I did the thing. I was like, with my ex-husband, I said we waited and we bought the house and then we moved in together and we, like we tried to do the things right, even though it wasn't perfect, but we tried to do the things. I said it didn't work out. I was like, and I have weird stipulations. And he's like, okay.
Mhm.
I was like, before I would even consider it, we would have to live together for a couple years. We'd
Yeah.
have to live together. I was like, I want to know that we can cohabitate. I
Yeah.
want to know that we are actually a mesh. I want to know how you operate as a father because I'm coming in as a single mom. I was like, I said, I don't want to do things the traditional way, but just because it's not traditional doesn't mean that it's not for us. I was like, so if you want to be on this journey, I'm kind of like, welcome on. And yeah, we got married like after we were together for about a year. We moved in together and we lived together for about 2 years after that before he was kind of like, have you thought about whether or not, you'd want to get married again? Have you changed your mind? And I'm like, you know what? I'm like, I would be open to it. I was like, I really would. I was like, it's been 3 years and I said, if you have any skeletons, you hide them very well. So, but even professionally, again, I didn't take the average journey. I have my GED because my pregnancy with my son made me very, very sick. And shortly after I had him, I actually had to have a complete and total hysterectomy. So I think everything happens for a reason. And basically, since then, like I have certifications, like some colleges here and there, or boot camps and stuff like that. But everything that I've done has been experience. And so none of my journey has really been traditional, which also means that there has been that like judgment along the way. And sometimes whenever people are reaching out, they're like, "How did you do this?" And I'm like, You're on a different path. You don't want to know what the road I took. I decided to take that hard road, and that wasn't a conscious decision back then, but I wouldn't change it either. I think subconsciously I knew, especially professionally, I knew how I learned. I knew what my strengths were, and I knew that for me, going and getting a degree was not it.
Yeah.
Um, I'm so glad I didn't either because let me tell
Yeah.
you, my husband has 2 degrees, and we're going to be paying that off for a really long time. So,
Yeah. It was interesting. My dad died when I was 14, so I that made me depressed straight away.
yeah.
So my school, like my grades, suffered through my teen
Hmm.
years, and then when I left school, my mum died, and so college, university just wasn't really an
Hmm.
option. I didn't have the grades. I didn't have parents, and I
Yeah.
just thought going into debt for more learning is probably not the best
Yes.
idea. I need to go get a job and start earning because I don't have a safety net anymore. I don't have parents
Yeah.
to move in with or pick me up when I go bankrupt. And all my friends went to university. Everyone I went to school with went to university. And I look at them now, none of them are using their degrees. And they're
That.
all just in debt and paying this thing off. And it's a controversial person, but Charlie Kirk says college is a scam. And I listen to that and I agree with him in that
Hmm.
because I think I feel like it might be more prevalent in America, but it's certainly still prevalent here. That
Hmm.
yeah, the rule is you go to school and then you go to college, and
Yep.
that's the way it is. And it's like, why isn't anyone stopping and saying why? Like I've known people who went to
Why?
I knew this one girl who went to university and studied 17th century French literature, the most niche thing I could ever perceive. I can't imagine any career that you could get with that. I've got
Yeah.
friends who did English, and it's like, what are you going to do with that?
What are you
But
doing?
saying that, I mean, I've got a decent career behind me. I've got a decent job title. I work in tech, decent salary without college, and
Yeah.
yet
Same.
when I still apply for jobs, the first thing under required that you have to have this is a college degree. And I'm like, why? I've done perfectly well
Why?
without it. What is that
Yeah.
actually providing for this role?
Yes. So I was actually speaking to a company recently, last week. something like that. And we were talking about a position that they had open, and I was just kind of helping to navigate like expectations and their requirement on the job description for a bachelor's degree. I said, you might as well just take that off. And they said, well, actually, it was like company policy that be on there. And I said, well, I said, I'm just letting you know you wouldn't be able to hire me. And they're like, but basically the conversation was, but you do this. And I'm like, I know, I've been doing it for almost a decade now. I have a lot of experience. I'm like, and I do not have a degree.
Yeah.
Um, and that conversation, it was great because like there were two people in on this, and one of them was basically like flabbergasted at the whole thing. But the recruiter herself was, her and I had a conversation kind of after the fact. And she said, I've been in recruiting for like 20 years. She said, I always talk to people first about their experience because she was like, I'm with you. She was like, it's ridiculous that this position even requires this. And we had a great conversation about that. And she was going to talk to HR, of course, about like changing policy and this, that, and the other. But my husband's the same with his degrees. Not to say that like he regrets the experiences that he was able to have going to college,
Yeah.
but at the end of the day, his is in like marketing and business administration, that type of stuff. That is not what he's doing. He's working more so like on the tech side. Now he's got a great job, but ironically, and this is something like I would love to hear your thoughts on this because I cannot wrap my head around. They require for a lot of positions some sort of degree. And when you talk to them, and I've heard this many times, they'll say, well, it's not necessarily a requirement, but we put it on there so that it kind of showcases your commitment and that you can follow something through. And I'm like, oh, so if someone has 20 years of work experience in doing this, that doesn't mean that they're committed and following something. I was like, I'm so confused at this, but it's happened. It's happened where even in like some of the government agencies that I've worked with, I've seen people who have 10, 20 years experience doing what they do. They go for a promotion, but they don't have a degree behind them. And they get passed up for someone who has never laid hands on this job, but they have a degree, and that degree might not even be in what? It might be a degree in English, and they're going for, some sort of director position of marketing. I mean, and I'm like, what?
So there are fields. Obviously, if you want to be a clinical psychologist, having a psychology degree is necessary, right? If you want to be a teacher, whatever degree you need for that, then obviously that. Even similar to your husband, so he did like business administration. I have seen certain roles. So I'm an operations manager. So there are certain roles that I go for where they say they specifically want a degree in business or business administration or operational
Yeah.
management or something like that. That makes sense. But when it's just any degree, you want to come and work in this tech company, but you need any degree, and it's like, I've got a degree in English, and I'm like, that'll do because it shows.
Yeah.
I mean, what does it actually show? It shows that you follow the crowd. It shows you're willing to get yourself into debt at the age of like 18.
I was about to say, it shows that I now have debt and I'm desperate for a job, so I'll take a lower pay just so I have an income coming in. That's what it screams to me.
It shows that you can absorb information and regurgitate it at the end.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's all the education system really is, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
remembering things.
Well, and it's funny that you bring that up because I feel like I used to do a lot of like operational stuff and a lot of like I do business operations consulting. So like,
Oh, okay.
yeah, but it's so funny because I feel like I did kind of a little bit of a brain switch because mine is on like the tech side too. So I do AI and business operations consulting.
Yeah.
And so for me, making that decision, I was doing business operations, but the majority of my stuff was lying in like development, especially like full stack
Right.
type development, right? Like engineering and back end. And after my surgeries, like there was an analysis of like what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, I was like, you know what? I thrive in operations. I can problem solve all day. Like, I actually enjoy it. It's like a puzzle, It's like piecing together projects and finding the problems and workflows and figuring out solutions, especially like out of the box ones. I mean, it's like a puzzle that my brain just chef's kiss, right? And so I was like, I'm gonna do that. And it's hilarious because a lot of people assume that I have a degree in that. And I'm very out on the fact that I don't have a degree. If they ask, I mean, it's not like I'm not meeting with a client and saying, just so you know, I don't have a degree in what I'm doing, you know? No, I'm talking about my over a decade of experience. You know, I'm talking about what I can do for them. And so it's really funny whenever I do run into people who start asking me about that. Or I have had someone take their assumption and introduce me that way, almost like it's a validation of some
Yeah.
sort. They were like, oh, like this is Kayla, this is her job title. She has a degree in this. And I was like, I do. And I had to take a step back and I was like, do I? Sh-?
Yeah.
Like I shook their hand and then I was like, if I correct them right now, I'm like, is this gonna like ruin my chance? And I'm like, but do I care if it ruins my chance? Like, I don't, I'm a very honest, open person. So like before we even sat down like at the table, and I was like, it is so nice to meet you. By the way, I actually don't have a degree. What I do have is hands-on experience
Hmm.
and a proven track record. And they were like, oh, but they were also really impressed by that and hired me. So I was like, okay, well,
Yeah, I remember when I first got into tech 6 years ago, it was a very low level, entry level job. But then after just 12 months, I was promoted to business operations manager. And I was
yeah,
asked to present to like senior leadership who I was. And in my presentation, I put that I didn't go to university, I didn't get a degree. And then I showed it to someone in my team just for their feedback, and he said
yeah,
I would take that bit out, and I was like, but why? What the way that I perceived it was that it was showing that I've got here without any kind of help, like I did this
yeah.
on my own. And he said, take it out because it just, I don't know, it kind of takes away from your abilities or your professionalism or something. But what you said earlier reminded me of something. You said you had this opportunity after your brain surgeries to really ask yourself, what do you want to do? And that's when you realized, I like
Yeah.
this bit, I don't like this bit. And now you've got this perspective to really follow what you want to do. And a guest I had on recently, Josh
Hmm.
Melford, his name was, who, a really interesting story. He started life homeless and now lives, he had a really interesting story, but now he's very wealthy, basically. And he was working in air traffic control for the American military, for the Navy specifically. And this kind of relates to the predetermination thing you said earlier as well. He needed some sort of clearance, obviously, to do that job,
Yeah.
and it lapsed without his knowledge. So he did it for a year without knowing that actually he wasn't allowed to. And then when he was going in for his like they had to like review his mental state and stuff like that to make sure that he
Hmm.
could get the cover to do this job. He realized during that meeting that he's kind of got a golden ticket here. He doesn't have
Yeah.
the clearance to do the job he doesn't want to do. So why doesn't he just not get the clearance and now he can go and do something else? And then he ended up applying for a job at the NSA and being a hacker, which is super interesting. But the
I love that.
predetermination thing, you said earlier, how everything happens for a reason. And this is
Yeah.
something that I totally agree with, but only
Hmm.
recently started believing in. But before
Yeah.
I get into that, there's a prerequisite question. Are you a Christian?
So yes, like I'm not like a traditional Christian though. I think that, I did the church thing for a really long time and I just I love people wherever they are, and I don't judge people and I don't judge their journeys. And I had a particular situation that kind of proved that, well, as the book says, that we need to be, the church is not where you're supposed to worship, right? It was a couple years back. It was actually maybe the year before. I think it was 2019 because it had to be right before COVID. So I was assisting with youth in the church, and we had a teenager that got pregnant, and she came to talk to me. I was a safe space. She was so worried, and I was like, "Look, I had my son 2 weeks after my 18th birthday. I was like, and I'm okay." I'm like, "So first, it doesn't mean your world's ending, right?" I was like, "And second, we're not here to judge you."
Hmm.
I was like, the only person that you really need to make things right with is, him, if you want to." And I was like, at the end of the day, this is your journey, and we're here to support. Why don't we go try to talk to the youth pastor and see what resources we can get you and all this kind of stuff. And we went, we spoke, and then I saw how she was being treated. And I guess since my journey as a teen mom, I was really hoping that mentalities had at least gotten better,
Right.
and they had not. There was just, even though leadership was okay, but I'm a believer that if you stand by and watch something happen, then you're complicit in that act as well. If you were against it, if you really if you were against it, you would have said something. You
Hmm.
would have stopped it. And that's exactly what I told leadership whenever I left the church, because they watched as people basically pushed this young girl. I mean, she just turned 18. They pushed her out the church. She did not come
Wow.
back. And I looked at them and I'm like, you want to know what's wrong today? You want to know why people are leaving Christianity? This. I don't read my Bible every day. I don't do Bible studies anymore. Like, I could probably quote it like through and through, just because, like I said, I used to be a super devout Christian. So I don't do any of that, because I think that my firm belief is that if there is a God out there, and if that God is good, then he sees what I'm doing. He sees that I'm a good person, and that I have a good heart, and that I work my best to love people and put positivity into this world. And I believe that if God is real and if God is good, he'll respect the hell out of that. So so those are my beliefs. And but that also stems around what I was saying. Everything happens for a reason, whether it's God, whether it's the universe, whatever. Really, I mean, even if you don't believe in anything, I think that there's still a rhythm to the universe. I think that, things happen, and they happen when they're supposed to happen. And it doesn't always mean that reason is good, though.
Hmm.
There's no reason behind it either. I mean, I'm dying. There's no, you know, I could sit here all day and be like, why? I'm sure there's a reason. Maybe this is something that, maybe I'm dying because I was meant to step into myself now.
Yeah.
And I mean, who knows? Maybe in a couple of years before something happens, they'll find a way to help me. But maybe I was meant to step into myself now so that, my son could have a little bit of an easier road, so that he could see my growth and go forward. Because let me tell you, my road hasn't been easy. Having a mom that has you at like 16 years old and living in poverty for the entirety of me growing up, I knew I wanted a better life, but I'm the first one. I'm the person, right? That has stepped out. I'm the person that has made something. I'm the person that has developed the career and push forward. I'm the black sheep of the family because I'm the one who stepped outside of the trauma and really grew myself. And having my son, and then going through everything that I've had to go through, I mean, maybe that's the reason. Maybe I am meant to be his motivator,
Yeah.
you know. So, long story short, yes, those are my beliefs.
I get the impression that in America there are two types of Christians because America is like mostly Christian, right? From what I see, at least, you've got like really devout Christians, as you say you were, or those who just kind of say they are but
Mm-hmm.
aren't really. But that's
Yeah.
just because America is still a very much Christian country, whereas England has kind of gotten rid of all of that, and we're
Yeah.
mostly atheists now. So,
Oh, I need to move there.
so I've been an atheist my whole life. I recently started believing that the some of the teachings from Christianity have good morals behind them, but I don't believe
Yeah.
logistically it just doesn't make sense that there is a
Yeah.
being in the sky and there's his son here and all that kind of stuff. So when I say I believe that everything happens for a reason, it's not from a predeterminist perspective that
Mm-hmm.
there is someone controlling it. I believe that things happen and we learn from those things, and we they then have the potential to make us grow, hence the
Yeah.
podcast. So I lost my parents as a teenager, as I said, but if that didn't happen, I'd be a completely different person. Like
Yeah.
so when my mum died when I was 18, I was like a reprobate. I was just living at home, living in my bedroom, playing video games, smoking weed all the time. If she didn't die and I didn't have to grow up and get a job and find my own place, I'd probably still be
Mm-hmm.
there now in my 30s. If the podcast is a prime example. So this is something I've
Mm-hmm.
wanted to do for as long as I can remember. Like when I was a kid, I remember wanting to have my own radio show, but I didn't understand how that would work. How does it
Yeah.
work? How do you get a satellite and transmit to? So it was always a pipe dream. And then like during lockdown is when I got all the equipment, the camera, the lights, the software, hardware, everything, and started setting something up. I decided I want to do it, and now we're in lockdown. Now's the perfect time to do it. And I got a website and emails, and I spent loads of time on it until came the point that it was time to hit record, and that's when I decided I was at a crossroads, and I was like, put myself out there
Yeah.
down the, it's kind of scary. Is it going to work? Are people going to judge me? Or drop it. Let's just go back to what I've been doing my whole life. So that was in
Yeah.
lockdown, and now 5 years later, after this past year, that's when I was like, enough. Like that's I'm as I keep saying, I was at my lowest ebb. I was unhappy with where I was. Now's the time to change course. Now is the time to follow my passion and do something that I love. And that's just got another kind of feather for the whole everything happens for a reason sort
Yeah.
of thing.
And realistically speaking, I mean, whether there's a God or not, and just throwing this out there and then I'm going to skip over it, but who's to say, that it's the Christian God, right?
Yeah.
So whether there is a God or not, we're here.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people miss that, and so they're desperate to like make these connections and to ask the reasons why and all this kind of good stuff. And it's funny because I've actually been told before that I use everything happens for a reason as almost like escape to answer that reason why, or answer that question why. And I told him, I said, at first I was about to get defensive, I was like, excuse me. But then I told him, I said, I do. I said, it's not an escape. I said, it's an answer. I was like, because sometimes there are just no answers, and that's okay. And I think we need to be okay with that. And then I think we need to move past it, right? Going on, you were talking about how you got everything together and then you waited, right? And you let things hold back. That's exactly where I was standing, and that's exactly the realization that I had. Like I was seriously still in the ICU in the hospital. Whatever, I was like, man, I really hold everything. Like I have everything I need. I have the experience. I have the equipment that I need to do the work that I want to do and to open my nonprofit, and I have the resources. I've spent 10 years building up a really good network of good people, not and with genuine connection, not just, in passing or people that I don't agree with, and not agree with, but like moralistically, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And I was like, man. was like, why am I doing this? You know, why am I doing this to myself? And I find more times than not, especially now, I heard this growing up, but I did not internalize it until my mid 30s. What's the worst that could happen? You know, like I ask myself that all the time. I'm like, worst that could happen. I go on this podcast, I talk about it, nobody watches it.
Yeah.
Or they think I'm boring. Or you know what I mean? Like maybe I blow up in a bad way. They're like, ooh, she's here in America. She's talking about God might not exist. You know, like I mean, that's the worst that could happen. And then I ask myself, okay, well, can you handle that? I mean, you have made it through 2 brain surgeries. Just saying. You know, and if the answer is yes, I'm like, okay, well, then go for it. You know, do it. Do the thing. And it's something that, oh, what is the quote that gave me that mentality? It triggered in me one day. It was fear is not the absence of courage. It's being scared and doing it anyways. Or no, sorry, courage is not the absence of fear. It's being scared and doing it anyways.
That's similar to another quote. It's not about getting hit and falling down. It's
It's
about
about
standing
getting
up
up.
afterwards. Yeah. And yeah,
Yeah.
you're right. I'm exactly the same. I've heard these things all my life, and then I just kind of, yeah, that's just one of those inspirational platitudes. As you said earlier, they're cheesy, and it's only
Yeah.
when you hit a point in your life where stuff goes wrong or not to plan, and then they kind of make sense, and you started to internalize
Yeah.
them and you use them, and it's interesting. I maybe I'm just kind of putting this out there onto other people the way that I think, but I assume whenever I see someone who's doing something different, whether it's a podcast or someone who started a business, I assume that they hit a point in their life where they were like, I'm not happy with what I'm doing. I'm going to make a change.
Yes.
And I always just kind of assume that they've gone through some shit and they made that leap. But I could be wrong. I honestly have no idea. I think most of the people I've spoken to on this podcast, yeah, they've all got their own business
Yeah.
because they've been through shit and they reached a point where they're like, I don't want to do the norm. I want to do something hard.
I mean, and I think that, you know, you mentioned earlier about this new generation of workers.
Yeah.
And I don't know, maybe it's because I've had a couple years of therapy. But I think that of course, through our trials and tribulations, we grow strength.
Mm.
We grow understanding. We get our knowledge. But I think that in today's society, we skip over things way too fast.
Yeah.
You know, it's oh, this happened. Oh, this happened. Oh, this happened. Right, and it's a missing element with our new generation that's coming into the workforce is honestly they haven't had a chance to breathe. Now, look, I know my generation here in America, like, I mean, I remember being in middle school and them turning on the TV to watch the Twin Towers. We turned it on and the second plane was hitting. You know, I mean, we got some trauma. But we also, you know, we're kind of this will lead into another thought in all honesty that I really would like to get out there, but we also are kind of the first generation to have a really good access to like that emotional intelligence and stuff like that, right? So then we start popping out kids. And then there's a pandemic. And I feel like no matter how old the child was, there was definitely an effect, but I can only personally speak to my experience. My kid was a preteen. And in those years, you know, it was like a good year and a half or so because, you know, I've always had a weakened immune system, which by the way, I found out is a part of this.
Yeah.
Should have known. But in that time, you know, there was just a lot of limitation and life really did change completely. And I think that it's not even skill sets and stuff that we're missing. I think that nobody really knew how to navigate and so we were just all like doing our best. And now we have this generation that has come into the workforce that really is a different workforce than we came into. And not just like to say it how our parents said it. Whenever we were starting work, they were probably like, well, this is a different workforce than what I was in. But no,
Yeah.
I mean, this is completely and utterly different. I'm not exactly sure how it's structured in the UK, but here it's a dumpster fire. And so how are they even supposed to navigate? There's no direction. And instead of taking that time to say, because I don't know about you, but whenever I first started work, my generation here was like, they were very heavy on like the training and stuff. Not like super hands on, but more so along the lines of like maybe even trial by fire. But they would call you out on it, whether nicely or not, you know, do this, make sure this is done, stuff like that. And I think a lot of the teams now expect a higher level of like emotional and mental intelligence from this generation because of the resources that they've had, that their brains are still not fully developed. Our
Mhm.
brains don't fully develop until we're 25. And I'll go into like the other thing that I said I wanted to go into in a second, but I wanted to give you like a second to respond before I like.
So my view on the new generation is I think they've been too sheltered.
Yeah.
So hence the reason I brought that quote up when my friends were talking about this, because the way it goes is hard times create strong men create soft times create soft men create hard times.
Yes.
So I think the way that I personally perceive that is one example of a hard time would be like 1940s, 1939,
Hmm.
World War Two, and we had strong men to go out there and fight those hard times. And then after that, I think that now we're living in a really easy time. We've got everything we could ever want. We've got
Yeah.
abundance of absolutely everything. And now I think this generation is just super soft and can't really handle any hardships. That's
Yeah.
my perception, at least.
Hmm.
And there are funny things, I'll admit, even if not a bit worrying, around. There's a lot of overdiagnosis, I think, and a lot of self-diagnosis. So there's a huge
Hmm.
spike at the moment, or for the past decade probably, of autism, ADHD, and other similar things, and they are real. I have family members who are genuinely autistic, but there are a lot of people that you see on social media, unfortunately, Instagram, TikTok, who are self-diagnosed with these things, and it's also really popular as well. So you
Yeah.
can tell by the way that they frame it. I've heard there's a the way that the slang now is touch of the tism. If that's
Yeah.
not just doing X is trendy, I don't know what is. But there was a funny one that I saw recently of time blindness. So this was
Hmm.
I don't know if you've seen this. This was a young girl who's clearly just joined the working force, and I think she was working at Starbucks or something. And
Oh my gosh, I know
she
the
was
video.
already, yeah, she was late.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, there was a couple. There was the girl who had to work 8 hours and she had a freak out on social media, but there was also the girl who kept being late for work, and her manager was calling her up on it saying you can't be late for work, and she said actually I've got time blindness. I find it really difficult to like be on time to things. Now that's made up, or I consider it made up, but that's the problem with overdiagnosis, self-diagnosis. We've got a whole generation who think that they've got something, and I could go on and on about this. I personally think that saying things are systemic, for example, I feel like it always just puts the onus on someone else. None of this is ever my fault. It's because I've got time blindness, or because I've got autism, or because society is structured this way. And that is true in some circumstances, but when you put absolutely everything on someone else and never take ownership of things, I think that's what's happening with the current generation. That's my rant. Now I'll pass over to you.
Well, no, I'll respond to that before I go back to the other
Okay.
thing. So I do have some rather like, I guess, rougher viewpoints on this as well. But it's really funny though, because we do have special needs in our family.
Hmm.
And for instance, like the time blindness girl, I remember seeing that, and I didn't laugh, but I was just like, man, I'm like, it's a lack of self-awareness, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's still up to you. And I remember even showing my teenage son this video, and I was like, I just want you to know, whatever you have going on, if you are able to be a functioning member of society, because you're a very smart boy, this is unacceptable. If you know that you have whatever, time blindness or whatever it is, then there's accommodations for that. That
Hmm.
it's your responsibility to put into place. And, previously I said something about how I, live off of my calendar. Look, I don't know if they call it time blindness or what, but I mean, for real, you can tell me, hey, I'm going to like meet you in 2 hours at Starbucks, and I will get like, just working or something and like deep into it. Next thing you know, it's 4 hours later and you're pissed at me. Or, that, and I just juggle a lot, I feel. And so I tell everyone, I'm like, look, if I don't write it down or it's not on my calendar, it doesn't happen. Right. And but I use that example with the very like, well, one of like the very videos that you're talking about with my son. And I was like, it's still not acceptable. I'm
Hmm.
like, even if her accommodation for this is that like she gets herself a flipping roommate that's a morning person and she pays that person $10 a morning to come and slap her. I'm like, there's always a way to make it happen.
Yeah.
Now, of course, if I mean, I'm not saying anything against like disabilities. When I say always away, if you don't have your arms, you cannot pitch a softball unless you could do it with your foot. I mean, look, I don't know. But I just think that I'm with you where I believe that people at a certain point, you are no longer a product of your trauma or your upbringing or your childhood. At a certain point, it is all your responsibility.
Hmm.
You're aware you're traumatized. You're aware that you went through hell. It's your job to just take that first step and say, okay, I'm gonna get myself help. Yeah, maybe start with a therapy appointment,
Hmm.
or something, and and it's your job after a certain point to just work past that and to work on you, because again, no one is going to make you do it. And so I hate to see whenever people are, very much like stuck in the past or anything like that, and there's not that like initiation, of just like taking steps for themselves. And I say that because I mean there are some that I I can't talk to because it will mentally drag me down. There's some that I'm like, I know the situation. I know what's going on. I feel really bad. I'm compassionate towards their needs, and I care about them. But at the end of the day, it is just they're also not doing anything for them. And I think that's where a lot of the difference lies too. As you were saying, like strong generations. I won't even say men. I would say like strong generations create like a weak generation. But
Yeah.
it's because we worked on it
Yeah.
and we said, whew, I had to take the hard road. I don't want my kids doing that. I want
Yeah.
them to be functioning. I want them to do all the things. I want them to succeed and have a will and a drive and a motivation in life. But I don't want them to have to, necessarily either. But in realizing that without a struggle, they lose some of that.
Yeah. It's a
Hmm.
fine line. As parents, we're both parents, so we understand it's really tricky to navigate
Oh, yeah.
because we do we've been through hard times and we don't want our kids to have to do that. But at the same
Yeah.
time, we understand the value. There is value there.
Oh, so this was the thing that I was going to say earlier. And again, I would absolutely love your thoughts on this. So
Hmm.
I also look at, you know, generationally, someone said, remember, you're doing the best with what you have. And I was like, you know what? That's true. If I don't have it, if I don't have that skill, if I don't have that knowledge, whatever it is, I can only do the best that I can without it. And sometimes you don't know what you don't have, right? And then I was sitting down talking with someone one day and I went down this like rabbit hole. It was pretty intense, but my brain was just like, whoa. So if we look at the generations, it was really only like 3 to 4, depending on like parents' age and stuff like that, 3 to 4 generations back, where we're basically disposable. They died at really young ages,
Mm.
the emotional and mental attachment to children because of, lack of proper medical procedures and healthcare, like as a total, really, during that time, you know, those are really the cases where you see like that generation where it might be your great grandparents, where it was like, yeah, they had like 2 siblings. No, really, they probably had like 10. They just, it was very rare for them to make it past the age of, like 10 or so, 9 or 10 years old. And I think that because of that, there was like that mentality, right? And then, and once a kid like reached a certain age, I think the parents were, then they were workers. It was like, cool. Like you made it, double digits. And you can say the ABCs kind of sorta. It's okay. Then you move to that, next generation that, went through all of that, and you're starting to get a little bit of medical advancement, but there's still like a lot of death. There's still a lot of lack of education, and then the generation right after is where you see like that's where that the baby booms here at least happened.
Yeah.
That's where you get grandma that's got 12 siblings and they're all here, and like especially with medical advancements, and that's about the time that like things like vaccinations were,
Right.
coming out and happening, and they were finding cures for some of the things that really were detrimental in childhood. What was not happening was an understanding, though, still of children and their development, and really, I guess, just like how to be a parent, right? There was still like a loss of that. The next generation is where we would get to our parents,
Yeah.
maybe grandparents. Depends. Again, it depends on your age.
Yeah.
Um, but and that's where you get, I mean, that's really where like things like early childhood development and stuff like that started to gain traction, and research and all these things. But but mental health care went from like asylum based to, hey, maybe everyone that is having problems isn't crazy.
Yeah.
Maybe we should be looking into this, and so you start to get that education, and then you start to get access. Telephones and TVs are, colorful and present, and you get like satellite. Oh my gosh, we can get more than our local stations. So you're starting to gain information, more research and development starting happening, but that doesn't mean that those were readily available resources, right? It really was, like going right in our parents' generation, going into our generation, where all of that started like booming, and the tech age really started like taking off, and that includes like healthcare wise as well. And so now, you reach like us as parents. I feel, in my theory in all of this, and why I took us down this wonderful journey, is we're really like the first generation, though, to like that's what we're focused on. We're focused on the development of our children. They really are our future. I mean, I don't know about you, but I heard that all growing up, like, oh,
Yeah.
children are our future. Well, that's because they really started feeling that, right? Like our parents' generation were like, oh, crap, they really are the future. Like not only are they the next working generation, but they're like the next presidents and stuff. And like we can do something about it. We can develop them and take action. And it was, and again, then there's us, and we're like, yeah, like, I know I can. Technology, came out like whenever I was a little bit younger. So I had that access,
Yeah.
in early adulthood to educate myself and reach out, and there's all sorts of resources healthcare wise in for my parenting and around those things. And so now we're just like on that other end of the spectrum, where I feel that I don't know. I feel like it's some sort of balance has to be created between we can healthily, mentally, and emotionally raise our children while not while also not creating a weak generation, so to say. Create a generation that whenever they go through brain surgery, they come out roaring and wanting more and to do all the things instead of crumbling. I think it's a balance. I think it's now we're overloaded. I don't know about you as a parent, but there's so much information out there.
Yeah.
It's difficult.
Yeah, it's really difficult. I think it's a very nuanced subject that I am by no means an expert, but here's
Hmm.
my very amateur perception, I think. Presumably, in those really old generations you were talking about, those were the days when the father provided and the mother did the child rearing. So I would assume that the children were obviously raised primarily by the mother. And then once women joined the workforce, that's when they had to start sending kids to like daycare and nurseries. So in that regard, I suppose they started somewhat outsourcing that to like, someone else who's not in the family. But yeah, in terms of the parenting aspect, it's this is the whole thing with technology and the internet especially and social media is we've got infinite knowledge and information at our fingertips, which is it sounds great on paper, but at the same time a lot of it is contradictory and you don't know which one to listen to. That's the
Yeah.
problem. And it's really difficult when there's two parents, which
Hmm.
is obviously the optimum kind of dynamic, but when when you're not aligned. So my ex partner, who's the mother of my children, she is on social media and she's on Instagram and she just believes whatever she scrolls on, it says to her and she believes it.
Mm.
And I'm the complete opposite. I'm not on any social media. So she would, when we were together, she would always find something on Instagram and just believe it wholeheartedly and send it to me. And I would just be like, this is just someone, you don't know who this
Right.
person is. It's just anyone. Everyone's on Instagram sharing their thoughts. You can't just believe or assume that they're like a child expert. It's really tricky. So at the moment, like our 5 year old is being well, typical 5 year old, really, really badly behaved, and now we have to figure out how to deal with that. So I bought a book which is currently being used by primary schools
Yeah.
about how to discipline children, how to broach those kind of conversations. And I sent it to my ex and was like, "This is the book that I've been reading. I think it's really useful. I think we should implement these things." And I can't remember what her solution was, but it was something off of social media. I wish I remembered now, but she was like, "I think we should do this," and it was just something completely different to like the logical thing. There was something else. Oh, this was so again around while I'm on the topic of my child's behaviour.
Yes.
We were talking about it, and she was like, "I don't know why she's just being so naughty." And I said, "Well, I know you don't like to hear this, but like I've been looking at the research, and there's a correlation between poor behaviour at this age and broken homes,
Yeah.
separated parents." And she said, "I you shouldn't pay attention to the statistics. Don't listen to data," which is mind as a business operations manager, that's crazy to
I
me.
was going to say, my entire life is data driven.
Yeah, right. I listened to the data, but the funny thing is that in the same breath, she said, "Don't listen to statistics," and then she said, "I know you don't believe this, but our child is a Virgo, and that's the reason why." And I was just like, "Yeah, don't listen to statistics, but listen to the birth sign. That's the reason."
Oh my gosh, I love it. Oh my goodness gracious. And it's funny though because like navigating all of these things, like you said they're 5 and 2.
Yeah,
Great age actually.
that's what I
Like,
keep hearing, and it's like it
oh
doesn't
God, I
feel
love that
like it.
age. You have to enjoy the parts like and I'm not saying like ignore the bad parts, and I'm not saying like it's not like oh enjoy the good because it'll make the bad easier even,
Hmm.
but it's the stuff that you don't think about even looking at. Meaning, like, the 5-year-old is a good example. I love that age because they're gaining a self awareness. They know they exist now. They're like, oh, I'm like a little person here and I can do my thing. They want a little independence. They want to do some stuff on their own, but,
Yeah.
they still need a lot of help.
Yeah.
They are forming opinions, even. I don't like pepperoni.
Yeah.
I mean, like, that's their opinion. And they're also experiencing, with that self awareness, life for the first time. And this hit me whenever my son was about that age because I was holding him. We were outside. I had him on my hip, and a plane flew over. And man, did that kid's jaw drop to the ground. I mean, and he was like, "What is that?" And I was like, that's a plane. And all of a sudden, like, the thoughts like went super fast. It was like, okay, he's only ever seen like planes in cartoons, so he's never seen a real plane in life. That is ginormous. Could I imagine seeing that for the very first time? Especially not knowing what it is, what it does, why is it in the sky? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's that thought process. And I was like, man, I'm like, he's experiencing all of this in this moment right now. And since that day, I mean, this is like 10 years later, I feel like I used that. I learned a lot from him about myself and even my motivators and stuff like that at that age. I realized that, we talk about self discovery. I don't think a lot of people realize that, they are supposed to be a different person, as they grow continuously. I mean, I'm definitely not the same that I was last year,
Yeah.
3 years ago, 5 years ago, completely different. And that girl was crazy. So, I kind of learned about self discovery from him as a toddler, as he was figuring himself out and how he handles situations and emotions, new emotions that he was experiencing. And I thought about that a lot over the past few years. Like, just with everything that I've gone through. I've thought about that so much. Just that moment with the airplane. It's so simple,
Yeah.
but it was like this weird life-changing moment, for me, where it just correlates to so many different things and it changes my perception and it makes me take a step back and try to look at things through different lenses, through different experiences. It's helped me form empathy, like, and grow that through the years in a whole different manner that I never knew even existed. And I think that's one of the best flippin' things about being a parent. I tell them all the time. I'm like, you know, I might have raised you, but you grew me,
Yeah.
and I'm just a better person because he was here. Not that that was why I had him, because I think sometimes people have kids for their own reasons, but it's not why I had him. But I think that it's kind of one of those like byproducts of parenting that a lot of people don't talk about and experience. So, because we get stuck in the weeds of trying to do the right thing and
Yeah.
oh my gosh, they're tantruming. Why are they tantruming? Because they have these emotions that they haven't had to handle.
Mm.
They've never had their car broken down on the side of the road and had to, not kick it so that they didn't break their toe. They have no idea what this is and what they're experiencing and why they're experiencing it and where it's coming from. And I think, even at my age now, sometimes I don't either,
Yeah.
you know.
So I don't know how it works in the American education system, but 13, as your son is around the age in the UK that we start getting told, think about what you want to do, what you want to study
Mm,
next in the next couple of grades, because that goes on to determine what you're going to study at further education, and then that determines what you're going to do at college, university. That determines what you're going to do as a career. So at the age of
yeah,
13, you have to plan what you're going to do for the rest of your life, which is crazy. But
crazy.
because of your situation,
Hmm.
and that kind of shaped how you perceive the world and made you realize this is what I want to do. Are you using that wisdom to try and impart some wisdom onto your son at this age to think about what he wants to do?
Actually, I have a really weird take on this. So I have always and forever told my son that as long as he has goals, as long as he's making enough money to live, I really don't care what he does. I told him, I was like, I said throughout my life, I was like in my 20s, I thought I was doing what I loved. I was working for the state and a part of a wonderful program for like women and children. And I thought I was doing what I loved. Since that point in time, 10, 11 years ago, I mean, that has shifted twice in huge ways. I have shifted a million times, but especially my professional focus has shifted twice. Why? Because again, our brains don't fully develop until we're 25. So how the hell are we supposed to know what we want to do until we die, until after that point, Like some people have it figured out and I'm like, for you, kudos. Love it. Congratulations. But for him, I told him I was like, you have to remember a couple things. First off, like a job is a job. You want to be happy. You don't want to be somewhere that you're miserable. Never stay somewhere that you're absolutely miserable. But like you want to make a living, but your job shouldn't be your life either.
Hmm.
It should be like, yeah, you spend most of your time there, but that's not where you're going to be living. That's not where you're going to actually experience your life. So find something that you're happy with. And but if you don't find that until you're 25 or 30 or even 35, that's also okay. In the meantime, I'm not telling him to survive. I'm telling him just find a way to thrive where until you figure it out. Whenever I was working my job with the state with the program, I kind of knew like after the first year or so, I'm like, this isn't going to be my forever, but I'm happy here. I was working with a great team. And when I asked myself what I wanted to do, I had no flipping clue. Like and it wasn't because I was lost. A lot of people confuse that. They're like, I don't know. I don't know where I want to go. I feel lost. It's because maybe you just haven't had the experience that you needed.
Yeah.
And that doesn't even mean hardship. That
No.
means we're not exposed to every career out there. You know, I have a client of mine who is a Santa. And did you know here in the United States, there are actual Santa schools? And there's a network of Santas. There's even insurance agencies that are specific to Santas. Look, I didn't know that being a Santa for buku dollars every season was an option growing up. I kind of wish I did. But it's a prime example of like there are whole like niches and wolves within ours that are operating and going that we don't get that exposure to
No.
until we do. And heck, I've known people who are 50 years old, 60 years old, and they said, man, I'm going to start a business because I always wanted to. I like this. I
Yeah.
figured out like I figured it out. I really love this. I could do it. And I'm like, go for it. Like if that's what's going to make you happy. And so that's what I've always told him. I told him I was like no matter if you go to college or not, like we support your journey no matter what. I was like literally because I don't want to ever put a pressure onto him to do what I want him to do, but I'm like my only stipulation is that again, like you got to get a job. You can't just be doing nothing, basically. You can't do nothing. You can't just sit here. It's bad for your mental, physical, and emotional health. Like, it won't develop or grow you in any sort of manner. So do something. Make sure you're not miserable in it and live your life. And I feel like eventually, if you keep growing and developing, you'll just one day it'll click and you'll be like, ha, this is what I want to do.
Hmm.
And heck, that might even be just what you want to do until you're 50 and then change your mind. You never know. And I did tell him, I was like, just to clarify, I don't want you to be wishy washy. I was like, there's stability in all of this. But at the end of the day, that's kind of like the wisdom that I wanted to pass on to him because I was like, you never know when inspiration's going to hit. You never know the trials that you're going to go through in life. You don't know how it's going to change you. and you don't know how life itself is going to change you at all. And what you love today might not last, but it's okay to not get stuck in the past and to move forward and grow with wherever your mind takes you.
Wisdom is an interesting thing because I feel like you only really learn the lessons by doing it yourself because
Yeah.
our parents told us certain things and now we tell our children certain things, but they don't listen until they reach that age where they. So examples would be, I remember being told when I was a teenager, like, "Oh, enjoy these days. These are the best days of your life." Because it just gets harder from here. And I was like, no, I can't wait to grow up. I can't wait to be a parent and just, not a parent, an adult, and have a car and a house, and I can go and do whatever I want all the time. And then you become an adult, and you're like, man, they were right. Those were the best years. Our parents say like, don't do drugs. That girl, that boy isn't right for you. Don't hang out with those kids.
Mm.
They're not the right people to be around.
Oh,
As
yeah.
you said, like, do whatever you want, but don't just sit around doing nothing.
Yeah.
But you don't learn. We get told those things and we don't learn them until we actually learn them. It's really unfortunate.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
I was guilty of this, and unfortunately most teenagers are. They chase dopamine,
Hmm.
and
Oh,
that's
yeah.
why so many kids do just sit around, scrolling on their phones and playing video games, because that does create dopamine. It does feel good. So we want that all the time, and then we do it all the time, and then you don't get the dopamine anymore, so you do it more, and then it's an onward cycle. But yeah, you only learn that when you're in your late 20s, early 30s, and you've done the damage.
Well, I mean, and a lot of those are like, I mean, what we talk about natural consequences, right? And not really the dopamine thing. I do think so. I'll say for our son, we've kept him very active just for that reason.
Hmm.
So that, well, because again, you don't know what you don't know.
Hmm.
How are our kids supposed to know, unless you expose it to them, that doing things like sports and, getting out and going skating, my son loves to skate, how are they supposed to know that that also releases dopamine?
Hmm.
Unless you're giving them that experience, unless you're showing them.
Yeah.
Does it mean they're going to love it? No. You might take them skating and then, I actually took my son first skating whenever he was younger, and he was like, and this is just something that my mom likes, until like a couple years back whenever he became obsessed with it, but that's the thing though. That's where the parents, I feel, in that situation, it's their job to step in and say, and they don't even have to say it. It's, I feel like actions always speak louder than words,
Yeah.
so I'm not going to tell him, hey, getting out of your room at least once a day for like an hour during the summer is good for your health. Instead, I'm going to say, hey, I'm running errands, probably going to go to the thrift shop and the cat cafe. You want to come? And teach him that those things make him happy, so that whenever he's trying to think about what makes him happy, what gives him those dopamine releases, it's not just the phone. It's
Yeah.
it's it's those other things. But I do want to challenge your mindset, because you were talking about, the how we look back sometimes, and our parents were saying, oh, remember, like, these are like the best years of your life. I had the mindset for like a little while when I was like, man, they were right. Like, I really should have enjoyed that. I challenged that though, because at least for me, my perspective is that they really weren't.
Yeah.
Not to say that they were crappy necessarily.
No.
I think that all aspects of life, but they really weren't, because I think each portion of our life feeds us in certain ways. They all have their negatives. They all have their positives. But if I'm so focused on that being the best time of my life, then what am I working towards?
Yeah.
Like, what the heck is the point in going forward if those were the best days of my life? Because I want, I want best days in my life, like I want to be able to still be happy and go, and I feel like it puts a cap, right? It's
Yeah.
kind of like, oh, I peaked in my teens.
Yeah.
And that's just not true. I mean,
No.
heck, because now I have adult money. So,
I think I misspoke. Perhaps not the best,
no,
but they were
you're
certainly the
good.
easiest times. But it's only Yeah. So they were the easiest times, and therefore I assumed they were the best.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so I do have friends who, to this day, we're in our mid 30s, they literally do look back 20 years ago and say, oh, I wish we could go back there. But it's only these past 12 months that I came to the realization that easy doesn't equal good. Hard equals good.
Mm-hmm.
So, and actually, I'd argue that uh, the past 6 months, let's say, I've been the happiest I've ever been. And like, I'm really
Yeah.
proud of where I am and who I am and like my trajectory, right, where I'm going to go. So I'm really looking
Mm-hmm.
forward to the future. So I don't think I would have peaked yet, which is good. But so before we wrap up, I've got a list of questions that I always ask. I pick out a few select ones that I ask my
Yeah.
guests. So for you, considering all you've been through, teenage,
Yeah.
pregnancy, and then obviously the brain surgeries and facing your mortality, etc. Whenever you encounter hardship such as that, what's the first thing you remind yourself in order to stay grounded?
I think one of the first things that I remind myself is it's really just who I am. I mean, I can do hard things. Just because they're hard doesn't mean they're impossible. And I don't know, I almost have a conversation with myself. And it's funny that you asked this because I had my MRIs 4 weeks ago. And normally I wouldn't have more for another 6 months, but I have to go back on Monday actually to have more because there's been changes. And man, the thoughts at first were, I can't do I don't want to do another hospital stay. I really hate getting in that machine. I never was claustrophobic before, but now I am. I don't want to do this. I don't want to have to navigate the doctors and the care and the appointments and the hospital and the stays and the food. And then I like stopped. I was like, okay. So I took a couple deep breaths and I'm like, first off, we have a lot more knowledge than we did then. We know what's wrong. Second off, we have prepared for this and we have plans. And so things are in place. It's okay. Even the food, okay? If I have another hospital stay, there's a game plan for food. So I'm like, and then the third thing really is it's grounding techniques. It's sitting down, taking some deep breaths, feeling myself, and assuring that I've done really hard things. And no matter what happens, no matter what changes, no matter where I'm at in this prior to my death, I can still continue to do those hard things. And and I have the people around me that are going to be there for me. And honestly, to put it simply, I give myself credit by telling me that I am a badass bitch. I know that sounds dumb, but growing up, I don't know about you, but our generation doesn't give themselves a lot of credit for some of the stuff that they've gone through, you
Yeah.
know, and worked past and gotten to. I've met so many different CEOs that, I mean, there's definitely something to say for being a humble person, but there reaches a point where it's just self-deprecating,
Yeah.
I refuse to do that anymore. I give myself that credit, and I'm like, you are like, do you know you? Do we need to have a talk here? Like, I mean, seriously, I'll look myself in the mirror. Do we need to have a talk here? And then I ask myself, like, especially if I continue down that rabbit hole, my backup is to say, if you were standing in front of your best friend going through the same thing, would you be telling her like these things? Would you be giving her the same criticism? Would you still be asking her the same questions? How would you treat her? Because if you wouldn't treat even your worst enemy on this level, then don't treat yourself that way. That is so mean.
Yeah. Question two. If money and expertise were no object, what would you do for a living?
Honestly, I would dedicate myself to the community. I mean, and again, that might be cheesy, and I used to stay away from that answer because of that, but I do not care. It truly is what it is. I've just really always loved helping people. I've loved making a difference, and it's selfish because I'm getting that dopamine, right? Like I'm doing it because it not only does it make a difference, but it makes me feel good. It fills my heart with joy to be able to make a difference in people's lives and help them through hard times. And I don't know, there's just something so flippin' satisfying about it and knowing the snowball effect that can happen of like man, I gave this person a car. They got a full-time job. Now they just bought a house. And now their next generation of family is going to have it easier too. Like, that is mind blowing to me. And so honestly, I would just work in the community and probably put a major focus on the nonprofit that my mom and I built and
Hmm.
just go there.
Question three, somewhat related. What does the perfect version of you look like?
The perfect version of me. Like this, but less frizz.
The way that I interpret this question is I've listened to so many of these motivational speakers, I can't even keep track of who said what anymore, but I heard one that
Right.
said, imagine you're on your deathbed and you are surrounded by the like spirits, and each one represents the the things you wish you had done, that
Hmm.
non-profit you wish you'd started, that podcast you wish you had started.
Yeah.
They each represent the things that you did not do. So I suppose in that vein, like,
Hmm.
what would you wish that you, or what do you hope you achieve within your lifetime?
Well, in that scenario, in that case, or understanding, I'm already I'm already doing it. I kind of had these thoughts, like I
Yeah.
said, I mean, having to face your own mortality, that was one of the things that I've really had to process through a lot are like, where are my regrets in life? And if I couldn't do anything about it, it was something, in the past out of control. I'm like, gotta drop it. But what are my current things? Like, what if I was dying tomorrow, what would I be sitting there going, man, I wish I could have done this? And those are the things that I'm doing right now, building up myself professionally. I don't know. I've been working like all my life, and I know that some people think that it's really stupid, but like one of my goals was just like I want to be out there and seen as the professional that I am, and I want to be heard, and then in a personal sense, the same thing. I want to be seen, I want to be heard. I'm tired of being quieted. And then the other big thing is just that focus on stability, because at the end of the day, like I feel like I've had a lot of life experiences, and in some cases a lot more than most people. And I don't know, I'm sure I could list off some fun things, like maybe driving a NASCAR car or something, like, hit that 200 miles per hour. But I mean, realistically, that's not something I would regret on my deathbed.
No.
All the things I'm doing, I'm already doing. I'm showing love to my family. I've prioritized the people in my life, both personally and professionally. I've made those connections, and I'm just being a good person. And so, yeah, I've built what is my perfect life so that I can live it until my last day.
Love it. So I appreciate we haven't touched on your non-profit at all. So do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, yeah. So my mom and I co-founded, and I wasn't trying to like plug.
No,
That's
I
why I
know, I
didn't
know.
never say the name. I was like, oh my gosh, be careful. Yeah, so my mother and I co-founded Automotive Service Assistance. Automotive repair here is very, very expensive. I don't know what it looks like in the UK, but here, just in the past like 40 years, it's gone up 120, excuse me, 1,020% in cost to repair your vehicle. Yeah, so we provide funding on a sliding scale fee based on income for repair maintenance. And then we do automotive education in the community, such as like how to change your tire, how to check your oil, and things like that. And the great part is because we don't receive federal funding, we get to choose how we have formed our sliding scale. So we've even had people that, maybe they are making six figures a year, but maybe they've just hit on some hard times.
Hmm.
You know, Dog had surgery. That's like 5 grand. Uh,
Yeah.
already did the transmission 3 months ago. You just don't know. You don't know people's situation. It's not fully based on just the money that they bring home. So we're able to take into account their entire situation along with like all their bills and stuff like that. And none of us get paid at the ASA. We're just all volunteers. I have a great board, and they're really amazing, but it's definitely just like volunteer because we put all those funds towards helping people. And then of course, like, I make my money with my company, Twisted Consulting. Yeah.
Brilliant. I was going to ask you to, like, I don't know, give people how to reach ASA, but you've done a pretty good job of explaining where to find you, so that's all good.
Yeah, it's autoserviceassist.org. And
Perfect.
that's our nonprofit.
Well, thanks very much for coming on. It's been really interesting conversation. I feel like we could do another one because we kind of went on a
So much.
digression and didn't really focus on your story too much, but I enjoyed it nonetheless. It was really good. Thank you very much.
That's okay, and I appreciate having me on. Like, I know that we talked about so many different
Yeah.
things, but that's kind of what excites me. I just like being able to have these conversations because clearly they're all related, or we wouldn't have gone down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, that's true.
Still I climb. Gotta get better. Can't fake forever. Rage against